Welcome to the Emerging Market Retail Podcast. In today's episode, we will be discussing about the impact of COVID-19 on the grocery retail landscape, particularly in emerging markets. And of course, we will draw some insights about what has happened in the globe, but more in Latin America. There's probably no need to recap what we have experienced throughout these years, difficult times of 2020, 2021, and now 2022. But let's talk about a few key points. So the COVID-19 hit China on December of 2019 and quickly started to spread across the globe. Due to that, countries imposed several restrictions to mitigate the spread of the virus. So they imposed lockdowns, movement and transport restrictions, other restrictions in terms of the stores, hygiene measures, among others. And the response was extremely varied by country and by region, with important shifts over time, adapting again to the different waves of the virus. Perhaps, Rafa, you can tell us a bit more about what has happened in Latin America.
Yes, of course. So in Latin America, we indeed saw very different responses from the different countries. You can think, for instance, of Nicaragua or Brazil at the beginning of the pandemic, who had a very slow response to the virus. Jair Bolsonaro, many of you may remember, was quite a bit on the news on those days. And in the case of Nicaragua, with really late restrictions coming from the government, there was this famous parade that was organized, Love in the Times of COVID, which is probably the worst idea that you could have at the time, but nevertheless, that was the only measure that the government took in the early days. And on the other hand, you had countries that reacted very strongly. There's the example of Peru, or the example of Argentina, where maybe many of the nationals from that country were not even allowed to come to their country for a few days, right? Now, the economies were very harshly impacted. Most of the countries lost between 5 and 10% of their GDP in 2020. There was soaring unemployment and poverty in that year. So, for instance, you can think of Peru dropping more than 10% of their GDP. And then there was, very different rates at which the governments were investing in order to escape from the challenges that COVID was posing. And in the end, what happened is that Latin America was disproportionately impacted by COVID, not just on the economic side, but also on the health side, with today close to 1.6 million official deaths registered, which is 28% of the global deaths, whereas Latin America only has 8.4% of the population worldwide. So perhaps you can tell us a bit of the impact that COVID had on retail operations across the globe.
Sure, Rafa. So this setting triggered some changes in the shopping behavior and of course in the store operations, to adapt to these restrictions and also to the new needs of consumers. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we experienced and observed these panic purchases that were very varied in terms of the different types of SKUs per per nationality in different countries.
But heavily concentrated in the toilet paper category.
I know, that was hilarious. Maybe in Europe, I saw some memes about that. And also less frequent visits to the stores, to offline stores, with bulk purchases, to buy to store, goods. And this probably was because of the capacity constraints, both in the offline which means that in the supermarkets, for instance, there was a maximum occupancy. So this also triggered or led to an increase in the visits from consumers to nano stores, becoming a very safe place to buy daily goods. And in the terms of the online, also we observed some, let's say, I don't know if I can name it as capacity constraints, but limited infrastructure, let's call it that way, because many companies were not prepared for this, right? So due to this, we also observed an increase in digitization, and not just like apps and web apps, but other types of initiatives like these ordering by phone or by SMS, and other innovations such as home delivery by different types of formats, not just the supermarkets, but also companies like the case of Justo in Mexico, or other initiatives like Tienda Cerca, which was developed by AB InBev in order to create this portal where you can, as consumer, go and check which nano store is close by and then connect via WhatsApp, And in the case of Peru, for instance, also these open air markets, which also helped mitigating, the impact of the pandemic while ensuring the flow of goods to all consumers.
Yes, and we also saw some changes, let's say, not just within the store operations, but also within the entire supply chain. Early in the pandemic, we saw many continuity measures, for instance, like the prioritization of certain SKUs within the assortment in order to be able to dedicate that capacity, that production capacity. And these were led as a result of both demand and supply shocks throughout the pandemic. We also saw the emergence of solutions to support key suppliers, for instance, through the use of trade credits. We saw rapid capacity expansion across the globe, and there's a couple of very well-known examples with Alibaba and JD.com massively expanding capacity in China, and indeed digitization also throughout the supply chain in order to facilitate the flow of goods. We can think, for instance, here again, thinking of AB InBev, of the Beast platform, which is used by stores to order from AB InBev. Now, what's interesting is that most of this knowledge really comes from online and modern channels, and particularly from developed countries. There's little data available, particularly on what happened on the traditional channel within emerging markets, whereas that's the largest retail channel across the globe, and where most of the people are still buying their goods. So we have decided to invite Juan Manuel Medina, who is an expert on the traditional channel in Latin America, to walk us through some of the changes within the retail landscape that took place in Latin America, with a particular focus on the traditional channel. So how about if we go there?
Yeah, let's do it. Very good. So welcome back to the Emerging Market Retail Podcast. For today's episode, we have invited the founder of Meiko. Meiko is a company dedicated to collect and analyze data, especially from the traditional channel in emerging markets across several countries in Latin America. Welcome, Juan Manuel.
Thanks, Camilo.
So I was wondering whether you could tell us, throughout the different stages, and sort of trying to draw a timeline from the pandemic, let's say from the early days where there was the uncertainty, whether there was anything that was going to happen, to what we're living now. Can you tell us how the grocery retail market has shifted in Latin America as a result of COVID?
Yes, absolutely. And you can imagine what this means to us, because we have a very huge field force. And when it started the lockdowns, it was, I don't know, we were very worried about the situation, and we start understanding the dynamics of the situation. Suddenly, and we were very lucky that probably 3 months after the lockdown, probably in March, April, May, by the end of May, we had the opportunity to start operations again with our teams on the field, with all the protection, all the conditions to protect our teams. But this was a decision that we had the opportunity to talk with the CPGs, talk with some government areas in order to realize that honestly we need to take the pulse and we need to track the situation, because there were also a problem, which was probably that the stores get out of stock of the basic categories, and this could bring another type of problems during these times. So when we went out after those 3 months, and when we went out to the field, we start seeing tons of changes in the behavior of the stores and the behavior of the shoppers. One that I remember the most and that really caught our attention was the how the shopper start to choose bigger sizes inside the categories under brands, bigger sizes. They start developing items and SKUs that have never became before important to those categories, but were bigger, more rice, more soft drinks, a bigger size of soft drinks, because they didn't want to travel to the store many times because of they were so afraid of the COVID and all that stuff. At the same time, we start understanding as the time goes on and on and on, and as we move forward during the year, during the 2020, we start seeing a change in the portfolio of the store. And suddenly some stores start to increase in probably SKUs and items in categories like alcoholic drinks, for example, whiskey and other stuff. And sometimes not only increasing SKUs, but in premium levels. And everything, probably this is some of the insights that we will at some point was indulgence. Everyone was in their houses with these lockdowns, and they need sometimes indulgence, and they start investing in some of these items. Later, at the end of 2020, when everything start to we get used to this situation, and what we start to see is that the impact of the lockdowns start to arise and start to see on the people of the socioeconomical levels, the lowest socioeconomical levels. The lack of money, the lack of employment, the lack of opportunities to bring money to their houses, and we start seeing some other behaviors, which probably one of them, the one that I remember most, was that they increased the time of the visit, the frequency. They diminish the frequency in which they visit the mom and pops and the supermarkets. And we start seeing that some transactions, for example, before the pandemic, the investment or the spending inside the stores during the day, AM and PM during the day, was very, I don't know, very dispersed. But by the end of the 2020 and probably in the first quarter of 2021, what we start seeing was a behavior that most of the spending, probably, if I don't get me wrong, but 50% of the spending, 55% of the spending, start doing it at 5 p.m. in the afternoon, 6 p.m. in the afternoon. When we try to figure out why this was going on, what was the reason for this to happen, we start to see that the shopper didn't knew if they were going to have money during the day. They start, I don't know, like starting to work on a daily pay, something, I don't know, they start selling some things on the street, or they start working again on their taxi or whatever, but they didn't knew if they were going to have money. So the spending concentrates at the end of the day when they already knew if they were going to have for the breakfast and the lunch and the dinner the next day. I remember those types of behavior. The pandemic was blew our mind in everything that happens. And at last, I would like to highlight something that happens that was very, very difficult for everyone. And I'm taking in consideration in this part, CPGs. Every single database got destroyed. Every single sample got destroyed because everything changed. A bakery became a mom and pop. A supermarket, a small supermarket, became a bar or a beer halls. Changed totally their portfolio. So this was very, very difficult for the CPGs, because imagine how they depend on these databases that they built during all this time. It was very, very difficult for them too.
Of course. And in that sense, what changes did you observe, that CPGs implemented in their commercial operations when visiting this type of mom and pop stores? Well, we know that there are pre-sales or van sales, right? The pre-sale that, that there was an agent goes, makes or takes the order, and then one day after, or maybe the same day, a freight vehicle distributes the goods, and the van sales that they have already the goods in there. So in that sense, what changes did you observe from the CPGs that you work with?
I remember that this was very difficult times. I remember the out of stock, and the out of stocks were produced because they couldn't arrive to stores, and it totally break their logistic chain. And it was terrible for them, and they start experiencing the lack of sales. So what I saw was a very I would say very bold moves, and they start using, for example, WhatsApp and another kind of communication, channels of communication, in order to make available their products. And that's what they begin. That was something that we saw at the beginning, and was that seed that then became solutions, more sophisticated solutions. And probably you're familiar with some things, then some kind of platforms and applications that everyone start putting on the hand of the stores. This is very challenging, because at the end, the adoption of the technology is a very, very difficult process in this type of environment. But it keeps amazing me and surprising me that the evolution and the transition and the digital transformation that the channel suffers. It's not enough yet. It's not done yet. I think that we are on a beta, still on a beta stage. There's tons of things to increase and bring sophistication to the value proposition of the traditional channel. But this was the conditions, the perfect set of conditions in order to this type of disruption to arrive. I cannot explain everything that they have done, what they did, but if something happens, is that there is a change of mind, a particular identification of the new opportunities that this channel offers to us, and is optimization, efficiency, digital transformation, and everything is going on right now. From my perspective and my humble opinion, I think that it's still on a beta stage. There is a lot to learn, in order to bring to the table a most sophisticated value proposition to develop the traditional retail. But everything is right now set to do it.
Amazing. So something else that I wanted to ask, talking to several CPGs, they were telling us that early on in the days of the pandemic, there was a huge shift in the market with a lot of the stores going out of business and new stores appearing, especially, let's say, in areas where there used to be many offices. Several of these stores had to close, right? Because the traffic was simply not there. Whereas, for instance, in residential areas, there was a boom in the traditional market with stores appearing. I was wondering whether you also identified that and what other kind of structural changes did you detect in the market as a result of the pandemic?
Absolutely. And also, there is a change in the segmentation of the stores. Probably somehow, because of the conditions and because of this radical change of conditions, we saw how a C-type store, because of their characteristics, became a A-type in 2-3 months. And it was because probably the other stores around it couldn't face the challenge and couldn't support the situation, and this small store arises and became super important. But obviously we start losing stores. It was very difficult, and we experienced that in 2020. So yes, we experienced a diminish of the numbers of the stores. Yes, we saw it specifically in the smaller one, the smallest ones of all. We saw these C-type kind of stores. They couldn't face the challenge. They closed their doors, and unfortunately, we saw that a lot. But in 2021, again, start to arise this channel and start to open new points of sales. And again, the CPGs start giving incentives and helping and putting the conditions, the most perfect conditions in order for them to grow, because the traditional channel is very important for CPGs and they are not going to lose it. So they know that they have to play the game and they have to put their part on the equation in order for them to help them. Or if not, they have to build new strategies to depend on other type of channels, e-commerce, modern retail, hard discounts. And they, from my perspective, I think that what the CPGs want is balance. They want a very balanced situation in which the traditional retail keeps existing and being important in their P&Ls, in their strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see from when you saw their strategies and when you saw their communication, what they start talking about was, we have to defend, we have to protect the traditional retail. And that is not by chance.
So, Juan Manuel, are you suggesting that due to the pandemic, customers are buying more from nano stores than from other formats like supermarkets or convenience stores? Is this something that you have observed? Are they buying more online? And in addition, how did the market share shift across these formats? I mean, from the modern to the convenience and to the traditional?
At the beginning, it was pretty cool to see that there was no other option. Imagine in the low-income neighborhoods in Sao Paulo, in Colombia, what you have at hand is a mom and pop. So there wasn't another option. It's sad. Sadly, they couldn't take advantage of the entire opportunity because there was another challenges, out of stocks, and everything that we have been talking about. I think probably that the winner here is a big part of this is the hard discounts, for example, in Colombia. This doesn't mean that the nano stores are disappearing and this is the end of the nano stores. Please stop talking about that. It's not going to happen. This needs a huge change and challenge macroeconomic in a macroeconomical way. What happened is that the pie is divided differently, that the modern retail also have this challenge to increase their capabilities and sophisticate their value proposition in order to bring more customers to their stores, and also a challenge for traditional retail in order to increase their capabilities. Probably the one that suffered the most was the small supermarkets. Those have experienced a huge challenge, but also is this force, this strong force that brings the CPGs to the table in order to save, to protect, and to help these kinds of stores. They can suffer and challenge, but that doesn't mean that the CPGs are going to let them die. They are helping them, and they are bringing solutions to the table, portfolio, etc., to play the game, on the long run, and this is for the long run, not only for a couple of years. I didn't mention the online, the e-commerce and online. You have to be very cautious when you talk about online, because this is super segmented. You need to have specific conditions in order to have access to buy online. So of course we saw an amazing development of the e-commerce and the online purchases, but we have to be cautious in order to the amount, the importance, because the growths are impressive, but their participation is still they are on a path, and obviously it's going to become super important in the future, and they collect their opportunity also during pandemic.
Okay, Juan Manuel. So finally, well, you mentioned, of course, several things that have changed in the different channels, in the different formats. So which ones do you see remaining in the long term?
Reshaping?
Mm-hmm.
In the long term, I think that I have an opinion on this one too, and is that everyone is seeking optimization and efficiency, and that's something that is going to drive the strategy in the future, and that brings to the table something that we cannot ignore anymore. And I'm not going to talk only from the perspective of the traditional retail, but from every single channel, and is this thing called omnichannel. The thing that we have to face is that the CPGs, the industry, is going to experience the challenge to build a strong strategy in many channels: online, traditional, hard discounts, modern retail, and you can name it. Every single day is appearing something new that challenges. This means that if we can be certain of something, if we can think about how the future looks like, is continuous change, and we have to embrace that situation, because the traditional channel is changing. And right now I'm going to talk about that perspective. I'm not going to talk about the other channels that I'm familiar with, but I'm not as expert as I'm in the traditional channel. But because the traditional channel is going to change, and it's going to change hugely. It's going to be a complete transformation of the traditional retail, and you can see it in India, you can see it in China, and you can see it in Latin America too. We understood that the traditional retail is not a channel in which where the other channels doesn't have to compete with the traditional channel. They have to embrace the traditional channel. And I saw an amazing paper a couple of months ago in which Amazon and Walmart have this amazing strategy in India in order to embrace and in order to help and in order to develop the traditional retail. And India is a magnificent explanation and an example of what the traditional retail means or the traditional channel means. 92% of the transactions and the volume of the CPGs and their brands and their categories, and the transactions goes into the traditional retail.
Thank you, Juan Manuel. So you actually helped us do a little bit of advertising because our first episode is on the topic of the transformation that is taking place in India. So please, by all means, everyone who is listening, go check that. But with that, we're going to conclude today's conversation. Thank you, Juan Manuel. This has been really super insightful conversation. We're really excited to see how your business continues to develop in the future, and we wish you a lot of success with that. Thank you so much once again for being here.
Rafael, Camilo, my pleasure. It's been amazing to have this conversation with you today.
Hi, and welcome back to the Emerging Market Retail Podcast. Now in this section with Professor Francois. But first, I would like to thank all our audience across the globe. You know, we have audience in the United States, in Mexico, in Dominican Republic, Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil, in Asia, also in India, in China, in Africa, in 4 countries, and across almost Europe, entire Europe. So thank you very much. More than 20 countries here. This is great as it's our 3rd episode. So please subscribe to our channel and comment on YouTube. And if you have additional comments, you can always drop us an email.
And
very good.
Give us 5 stars, right? On Spotify and Apple. I think
of
we
course,
need the
Professor.
5 stars, right?
Yeah, so like, comment, follow us, and stay in touch. The idea is to have, you know, a strong community that is interested in discussing these topics and thinking of where there are also opportunities to discuss here in our podcast. So we just had a very interesting conversation with Juan Manuel from Meiko. He's based in Colombia. And he told us about different challenges that the traditional channel has been experiencing due to the pandemic, right? So Rafa, why don't you tell us a little bit of the key points that Juan Manuel mentioned to start this conversation with Professor Francois?
Of course. So yeah, we really had a fascinating conversation where I think we really learned a lot about the changes in the NanoStore channel and also across different segments of the grocery retail market within Latin America. Particularly, one of the points that really caught my attention was the fact that the traditional channel early on in the pandemic really became like the go-to market for many consumers in Latin America. I think Juan Manuel even mentioned that this was, in the end, a missed opportunity, probably because of all the challenges that the CPGs were facing with stores disappearing, stores reappearing, cash flow problems from the stores. So, Professor, I wanted to ask, do you also think this was a missed opportunity? And what could the stakeholders have done differently in order to deal with these challenges?
Yeah, I don't know if everywhere it was a missed opportunity, right? But definitely in some places. And Juan Manuel and Meiko, they have fascinating granular data on what's happening really in the store from a full assortment perspective. And we know that in a number of countries, at least initially, there was a bit of a hit in the market share, right? So Colombia, for instance, suffered quite a bit. But we also know in some other countries and some other CPG manufacturers, they really managed to take advantage, right? For instance, we have been discussing in Bolivia with Delicia, a consumer goods supplier, who also noticed exactly what Juan Manuel said, that there was a massive shift. So some stores, a considerable part of the stores, I think it was even like 25 or 30%, closing down. Typically, maybe stores that are in more commercial areas because people were not able to go out. But simultaneously, stores opening, new stores opening, either residential stores or ambulantes, right? Street vendors opening, and companies like Delicia, and I'm sure there were others in other countries, who more or less overnight somehow were able to shift their sales. Now, you're only able to do this if, for instance, you can shift from pre-sales to van sales relatively quickly and then take advantage, right? So I think that's a great example. Remember last time on the podcast, one of the previous episodes, we had Daniel Yu, and one of the things that Daniel did during the pandemic is he worked with the government to issue the vouchers that the government was giving to people they were extremely poor, lost their job. They got vouchers. These were electronic vouchers, and were being distributed through Sokowatch's system of vendors, right? So you see Sokowatch and their vendors taking advantage of this. I think this is the second a really great example. Maybe the third one is bees, right? And I think more or less bees has become now so famous, but maybe not all of our listeners across the globe have been familiar with bees. But bees was a rollout by AB InBev to essentially digitize the ordering process of stores to AB InBev to reduce the level of contact that was there between the pre-sales agent and the nano stores, and this has been a massive success, where millions of stores across Latin America actually transferred to online buying, and AB InBev is now currently strategically developing bees also into a multi-vendor platform, right? So you see the power essentially of a change in behavior due to the pandemic that triggered this digitization happening at a large scale, and in this case even a market change happening where potential consolidation across multiple manufacturers is happening. So I think there are definitely examples of manufacturers that have taken advantage.
Professor, now let's get into another important part of the equation, which is cash. So Juan Manuel alluded to there being substantial problems with cash flow at the consumer level, right? So consumers suddenly not having that, continuous flow of money that usually they would have, because unemployment was obviously a big challenge. And so this somehow has to permeate eventually into the supply chain. So I wonder how you think this affects the structure of the market and the entire supply chain, and how can nano stores contribute to addressing these challenges among poor consumers?
Yeah, I think so. The entire effect of the cash flow essentially affecting the entire operation in the supply chain. This is one of the main topics in our research. It's one of the areas where you are also working on Rafa at Tilburg. And essentially to sort of draw the big picture there, is what we are arguing is if the cash flow in the supply chain can be enlarged, it has a disproportionately large impact on the operational efficiency of the suppliers in this case, right? And we do lots of quite detailed analysis with our research partners, many CPG companies on this topic. Now, what makes this event particular is that I would say relatively sudden, and probably also for a relatively finite period of time, suddenly there was no cash at all, right? So many people could not go to work, since people are often paid by the hour or by the day of daily wages. This implies that cash was not available. Also uncertainty in cash, like Juan Manuel described, well, in many cases was not clear at the beginning of the day whether a consumer would have money at the end of the day, right? So buying patterns change. Now, if you take that to a supplier, what the implication is, for instance, of this particular change in cash availability, a very simple implication would be that if I arrive in the morning with my goods, I have a much higher likelihood that I cannot do a delivery because I cannot be paid, right? At the same time, it's probably also an opportunity, right? So every challenge is an opportunity. And what we also know is that this in a number of countries, for instance, Peru, also Argentina, this pandemic was also a major driver to digital payments by consumers, right? So consumers having their wallets, Mercado Pago wallets, like it's already quite common in some parts of Africa and Southeast Asia. Much of that is now gradually entering into Latin America, and the pandemic also served as a way to put this in place. In the end, if the wallet is empty, there's also still no payment. We have to realize this. In the end, the wallet is a digital cash, but if I have no cash, I also have a zero, an empty wallet.
But Professor, I was wondering how can the different stakeholders of this industry, of this ecosystem, can push forward the digital transformation of nano stores? I mean, the pandemic one was one, let's say, driver, but how can CPGs and the government push forward this? Because there are many inefficiencies related to cash, for instance.
Yeah. So if you look at digitization, I think we can essentially look at maybe three different elements. One is one which we discussed already a bit earlier. This relates to everything around digital ordering and the digital interface with the manufacturer, right? So also the digital payments potentially happening there. So I think all the digitization there, I believe, we're trying to collect evidence for this, will lead to substantial operational efficiencies, right? So this type of it's essentially by making transactions more efficient, and also because I think through the ordering, we could potentially also make transactions smarter, right? Because if there's digital ordering, essentially as a supplier, we're also collecting more information, and potentially we could use this to actually improve the quality of ordering, right? And so I think that's one way. I think on the other end, at the store, there is the digital interaction with the customer. And the most prominent place, I think, there are digital payments by customers. Mm-hmm. But you could also think of services that the stores are providing to the consumers, right? And much of that has been started by convenience stores initially in Asia. If you would go to Taiwan or Japan 15, 20 years ago, you would see that 7-Eleven there is more of a service store than it is selling products, right? So you can do many digital services there. This has moved into convenience stores in more developing economies. We go to Indonesia, like Indomart, very similar concept, or OXXO in Latin America, where services are provided, like buying top-ups for your airtime or data access, right? Or maybe paying your heat or electricity bills.
Yeah,
right?
Also the money transfers.
Money transfers, yes, to get money from family living abroad, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's happening, but this is where a manufacturer can also strategically take initiative to help nano stores providing those services. And I think a very interesting example there in Latin America is Bimbo, Grupo Bimbo, the largest baker in the world, serving more than 5 million nano stores in Latin America, but also present actually, by the way, in the US, in Europe, and also in Asia. And they have developed a solution already quite some time ago, originally under the brand Red Cubo, now it's called BimboNet, where they essentially enable nano stores to also offer this type of services that we were just discussing: top-ups, digital payments, these type of things. And what we what I believe is that essentially in the end will strategically benefit the suppliers in two ways. One, because essentially it will increase the overall cash flow and income of the store, providing them with more opportunities to buy products from their suppliers, but also in terms of their survival. Right. I think, as we know, the survival rate of these stores on an annual basis is not very high. Actually, the total number of stores in many countries is still increasing, but annually there's quite a number that are turning over. So stores going bankrupt and new stores emerging. And I believe this can be positively affected by having more of these services. And strategically, manufacturers can make these type of investments if they look at the store as essentially a virtual extension of their operation.